friends. Again, appreciate you guys for joining us on Crosswit Talk and today's topics. We actually got several topics. We're not really going to be super rigid on this, but we would like to talk about a couple of things. And mainly today's subjects, and you know, like I said, we're not glued down to anything. But we're going to talk about some urban legends. We're going to revisit some films, some creepy films. This is a Halloween edition, so we've got a lot to talk about. We're not on a timeline. This is a pre-recorded episode, so if you were looking for us live today, we're not live. So we got some time. So I'm just going to jump right in, dude. Me and Matt were talking the other day on the phone. We were just kind of talking about some ideas, and of course, you know, we both love conspiracy theories. Even the ones I don't believe in, I just love them because to me they prove that. You know, I know me and you've talked different times about different political things, and I think you were the one that taught me that, you know, the premise of where you're starting from is the most important thing, because if you start from the premise of one thing and this person starts from the premise of the other, there's no way you'll ever see eye to eye because you're starting from a different point.
Most of the places in which human beings disagree is because they disagree either about premises or about definitions. And that's what we call a moot argument.
Which is what if you and I'm going to go ahead and I don't know if I can do this. I guess I can do this. Well, one of the shows that I know me and Matt watches is Crowder, Louder with Crowder, and he always, whenever he's the one that does the show. Hey, I'm pro-gun, change my mind,
right.
Or I'm pro-life, change my mind. And what he does, he goes to college campuses, and I'm going to try to get back on my, you know, on the creepy stuff. But again, to understand where we're coming from. He'll go to a campus and he'll say, okay, I'm pro-life, change my mind. And the difference in like what he does, like maybe Ben Shapiro does, is Ben Shapiro goes and gives lectures and answers questions. Crowder doesn't like to do that. He likes to sit down and likes to let someone plead their case, and then he takes it step by step. But the first thing he does when he talks to someone is he does two things, and it's funny you say that. Number one, he states his premise, he states his belief, and he defines the terms so that we are not arguing against different definitions.
Right.
So...
yeah, that's the first thing you have to do is you have to establish the common ground. Thomas Aquinas said that, and we're going to talk about Thomas today a little bit later, I hope. He said, you know, you have to know your opponent's argument, because if you don't, you're doing something, but you're not arguing.
So getting back to, you know, I guess you could say the creepy stuff. So me and Matt were talking about things, and we both love conspiracy theories, and we both love urban legends. And one of the creepiest urban legends has sort of, I guess, made its way in the last probably 10 or 15 years, probably only become popular maybe in the last 5 or 6, is this, and most of you have probably never heard of this. I certainly had not. And that was this urban legend of black-eyed children. So just to give you a quick understanding of what this is, Halloween is, the black-eyed children are stories of people encountering, usually, I'll just give you the general idea. There's two basic versions of this legend, of this myth, whatever you want to call it, and that is, I call it the home version and the vehicle version, okay, because mainly there's only two stories that this is done around. The home version is typically somebody is at home, and in the middle of the night, or at some point in the night, they get a knock on the door, and they go to the door, or maybe they don't go to the door, and the knock will continue until someone finally comes and answers it. And when the person comes to the door, they'll look down, there'll be children standing there. Well, obviously, if two children are at your door, most people are going to answer the door and see what what they need, especially if it's the middle of the night, because you would think they're in trouble. So typically the scenario is that they'll open the door, and these children who look and talk very strange, usually pale-skinned, looking down like they're avoiding making eye contact, and talking in a very monotone voice. There's something, almost in every version of the story, something strikes the resident, the home owner, the person at the door, very strange. Something about these children are very strange, and it resonates with them. But typically the children will say very generalized statements like, and generally forward, almost weird, like they don't make any sense. Like most people don't talk like this. Just flat out say something like, "Can we come inside?" or "We thought we would just stop by." And these aren't neighborhood kids. These are not kids that anyone would recognize. They just come out of nowhere. And at first they'll say, they may say, "Can we come inside? Can we have something to eat? Can we have something to drink? Can we use your phone? Can we use your restroom?" Usually generalized statements like that, real short to the point. And in the stories, when the person is hesitant, or if the person doesn't allow them in, the children will get more forceful, they'll get more agitated, they'll want to come inside, but they can't come inside, but they'll want to come inside. If the person, in almost every version of this I've heard, if the person says no, then the children will just vanish immediately. So that's the home, I guess you could say the home version. There's also a vehicle version. And the vehicle version is basically the same thing, except for the children tend to ask for a ride. But whenever someone says no and they see them, in both cases, when the person sees them or looks at them, there is either solid black eyes or black voids where the eyes are, if that makes sense. So that's the legend. And they ask, can we have a ride? You know. So this was creepy to me on so many levels. Number one, because children involved in anything. We love children. Okay, yeah. I have a son. I have a stepson. They're the same age. I love them both dearly. And children are definitely a weakness for me. If I see a child hurt or in pain, I'm going to help it. If I see someone hurt a child, I'm probably going to do things that will put me in prison. So I'm very, very protective of children. So when I see children on the flip side, in movies, when children are the subject, like we're going to talk about The Exorcist in a minute, and when children are the subject of the problem, if they're the victim, or if they are the antagonist, I guess, then it's super creepy to me. So
that's why I think so many films will use children.
We use children because it's a weakness, right? That's immediately when I heard this, and I work nights, and I work, and I drive a lot of back roads. So when you hear a story like this, you can't help but think, man, what if I looked up the road and these kids were walking through? Because that's kind of where the stories go. So I did some background on it, all right? Because I want to know. I haven't
heard this, so I'm very interested to hear.
Yeah, so you can Google it right now and you'll come with some stories. But I'll give you the background on it. So I looked at the background and actually let me Google the guy's name. I know his first name is Brian. I hate to do this like while I'm talking, but I forgot the guy's first name. But there is a guy. Most of this in a modern time comes from a Brian Bethel. Thank you, Matt, brought that up. Okay, so most of the stories come from Brian Bethel. Now I do want to give you something that's really interesting. And Matt, if you have anything on this, just kind of write it down or shout it out or whatever. But I looked for witnesses to this, and I'm talking about not stories generalized of. Most of the stories you'll find in urban legends are going to be someone experienced this or someone said that. So I looked for names. I wanted documented cases, not that documented cases that had happened, but just documented witnesses, people that claim it happened. All right, give me a name.
Yeah.
And actually, the only one I found was this guy, Brian Bethel. I didn't find anybody else. Now, what I found interesting about Brian's story was that he claims, and he says, and other people say, even Wikipedia says, I don't know who wrote that article, but even Wikipedia says, and other things claims that these stories go back to the 50s. And I read some stories that allegedly go back to the 50s, but none of them have a name to them. They may say a first name like Harold or something, but I couldn't find any actual cases of this story to where they said, Joe Smith, of this time, told a newspaper reporter this, or told the police, or a police reporter anything. All I find is stories that say this person experienced it, except for Brian Bethel's. So Brian Bethel in 1996, I believe it was 1996, it was in the 90s, he wrote a story on, and I don't want to mess this up, but it was something, I believe it was like maybe an email list or email group. It was before you had social media and you had these type of stuff like, it could go viral.
Right.
But he wrote this story on some type
email. I think AOL started in 1995.
It was some type of email chain type of deal. And he wrote this story, and in his version of it, he was at a bank, which was close to a theater, and he was depositing money or something to the effect. And while he was sitting in his vehicle, he was approached by two children who had solid black eyes and asked him for a ride home because they needed to get money and they wanted to see the movie. And he said the movie that was playing was Mortal Kombat, and they wanted to see the movie, but he said it was strange to him because when he looked up, Mortal Kombat had been playing for a while, so it etched in the wrong way. Their eyes were solid black, and essentially, long story short, is he took off and left. And he's told this story over and over. So there are other versions of it. He's is the only one that actually you can put a name and a face to, that he's actually saying that this happened. Other versions of it.
Did he say that they actually disappeared?
Yes, he said he. So his story, after he said no, when he looked at the children, only one of them spoke.
Right.
And he was kind of demanding of a ride, and then he said when he just drove off because it freaked him out when he realized, I guess when he looked at their eyes, I think is when the point, and then he took off, and then he looked in the rearview mirror. I know in other stories I believe he said they were gone.
Right.
So so that was the only time I could find the story where there was actually someone's name attached to it. Now, there is a man whose name is David Weatherly, who's got a book out that you can find on Amazon. I'm going to go ahead and plug him real quick, about the black-eyed children. You may read that book and find documented cases. I didn't read the book, so I don't know. But nothing I could find on the internet, I couldn't find documented cases. Some other versions of the story are, there was one story in Vermont where an old couple lived in the house, and the children came to the door. And there's only two stories that I could find where the children actually were allowed inside. Okay?
That was going to be my next question. What happens next?
What happens and that's what everyone says, what happens if you let them inside? Well, I only found two stories of that happening. Actually, interestingly enough, I found one that was about a car and one about a home. Mm-hmm. So in the home version, the children come up to the house. I believe it was in Vermont. I think it was in the wintertime. And they come up to the door and they ask to come in. This is either a long time ago or the couple didn't have technology. There wasn't cell phones and that. They allow the children to come inside. I think they're hungry, and the children sit on the couch. They don't really say much, and at some point they leave. And I forget why they leave, but the next day the couple, or I believe maybe the man, the husband, he becomes sick. Okay, he becomes ill, and that's generally the story. There's really not much to it other than that. Now, the vehicle story is a little bit more interesting. It almost kind of sounds to me like a resurrected version of the home story.
Right.
I don't know. But in this story, a woman is in a vehicle with her child, and I think there's different versions of it. The woman's in the vehicle with her child, and she gets out of the vehicle, gets back in, or at some point she looks behind her, and this child is inside of her car with her child in the back seat.
Right.
She sees the eyes, it freaks her out. I think she jumps out of the car for a minute or something, and then the kid disappears or vanishes. She gets back in the car and she asks her kid who that was. He doesn't know. She says, "So you don't know that child? He's not from school?" And she said, "No." The kid said, "No." They said, "Well, why did you let it in?" And he said, "Well, I wanted to go home and play with me." Mm-hmm. And then that kid later on ended up becoming ill. And I think the version that I read was that when it became ill, had to go to the doctor, the hospital, and the symptoms that the child had were changing. So it started out with flu symptoms and maybe like appendicitis or something, but the symptoms were changing. They never could diagnose it. I think eventually the child was fine. I know in the other story the husband was fine. They kind of so it was almost like it was like maybe a type of radiation or something. I don't know, but like I said, I looked at it, and then I looked on YouTube, and I looked up all the stories. I even texted Matt. I said, "Dude, I'm like 6 hours in this black-eyed chill thing."
I was going to say that should be another one of our taglines. We fall down the rabbit hole, so you don't have to.
I fell down it hard, dude. So I looked up, and there's this show called Fake or Fall, or Fact or Fake or something. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and they have like a whole research team that goes to the internet and scout. They determined it was false, kind of based on the same things that I had. There's really no documented evidence of this ever happening to where there's not a whole lot of names. There's just one guy.
Right.
So, and they found a hole in his story. And the hole in his story was that he said specifically two things, and he stated them as a fact. Whether he was mistaken or not, he stated them as a fact several times. And the biggest one was that the time was 1996, and I think he gave the month, and that the movie playing was Mortal Kombat.
Right.
And they went back to that theater that he was at, and actually, number one, they realized that Mortal Kombat wasn't playing nationally at that time.
Right.
That had already been passed.
Yeah.
And the Annihilation, which was Mortal Kombat Annihilation, was the sequel, had not come out yet.
Right.
So they went to that theater to make sure they weren't playing some type of reruns of it. And according to the theater records, that no, they were not playing that movie. So the first hole in the story that they told him, that they said was, "Okay, dude, well, we know you're wrong."
Yeah.
In the sense that that the movie wasn't playing. And the second thing that they brought up that he doesn't tell, and I watched his interview. And he's real defensive right off the bat. He's like, I hate it when people tell me that I made this up. And when people tell me that I started the Black Eyed Children thing, it goes back to the 50s. Well, Wikipedia says the exact same thing he said, but I can't find him nor Wikipedia saying where specifically who in the 50s said it. Well, then, another thing that he didn't tell people was he is a student of the occult. Okay? Now, he's a journalist, but he wrote an article a few days before it that was kind of
about
weird stuff, too. And that doesn't mean necessarily anything, but, I didn't find... based on what I heard him say, credible. And now granted, he didn't, watching him talk, he didn't give any. I don't believe, in my experience, most cops don't. We don't believe in the whole, a whole lot of his eyes went left and right, so he was lying.
He was shifty. Yeah.
I had people come up to me daily and look me straight in the eyes and tell me the most ridiculous stuff on the planet, and they can lie straight. And they're like, and people say, well, they're psychopaths, they're trained liars. No, they're just freaking dopers. And I'm telling you, more people in this generation that we live in right now can lie with a straight face than I'm not saying they can pass a polygraph, but I'm telling you right now, they don't give the typical symptoms that you'll learn in school about.
No, I've noticed that. I mean, I've been teaching in college long enough to know that there's a generational shift,
Yeah, people are capable of doing some
and
stuff.
In fact, one of the things I used to teach in my comp classes when I still taught writing was how to tell whether what you're reading is credible or not. And I'll give you an example. I used to use this really great essay that I think was entitled something like 500 miles an hour, sideways and upside down. Okay, and it's the story of a journalist about that summer that he bought his first car. Right. And it was back at this time, and he doesn't give the state. You can kind of figure out from the details that it might be Florida, might be Alabama, but it's a great story. He's got some great lines in it, like I worked through hell and sweat through that all August to make make enough money to buy this General Motors muscle car.
Right.
And he sets it back in the 70s. But doesn't tell us what the model of the car is.
Yeah.
In fact, every car he mentions in the story is either a Dodge or a Plymouth or a Ford, but it's not I want to know, is it a Mustang? Is it a GTO? Is it a 442? A Chevy, a Chevelle? What is it, right? So that was one clue. I was like, that's an odd thing for him to leave out. What model of car did he buy?
Yeah.
Also, at one point, he mentions that he parked it under a pine tree. And nobody's going to park their muscle car baby under a pine tree,
right?
A pine sap, dripping on it when it gets windy. But the other thing is, it's the same thing you just said. He mentions that he had one 8-track tape, and it was the Eagles' greatest hits. Well, one of my students, years after I've been using this essay,
which would be a pretty decent 8-track tape.
It is.
I would buy it.
But it was the wrong year.
It was the wrong year.
He had the wrong for that tape. So I was like, if I'd been his editor, he had originally published it in the Miami Herald.
Yeah.
I would have published it, but I would have gone back and say, look, the devils are in the details. Make sure that your details, you know what I mean? So there were these clues in there, and this is a widely circulated essay that appears in college composition
everywhere
books.
Now, right?
And by the way, it's a great essay, so I teach it anyway. And I tell my students, if the story that you tell is good, then you're telling a truth that it doesn't matter if it's necessarily supported by the facts. The point of this story wasn't that this really happened to me, but he really captured a moment in every kid's high school coming of age year, where he realized about himself that the only reason he wanted that car was not because he loves cars, but because it changed his social status. And then he wrecks it, and
Well, a couple of things that I found interesting about the Black Eyed Children too is. There seems to be, and of course one of the theories is that for people who believe in it, and I will just tell you right now that I thought it was the creepiest story ever. After my day of falling down a rabbit hole with them, I don't believe that I don't find, and I know Brian Bethel, he said specifically, there's nothing that pisses me off more than when people say I made it up. Well, Brian, if you're listening, I'm going to piss you off because I think you freaking made it up. I think you made it up, or I think that some kids, he also said that, and he made a decent argument, but I also have a counter argument for this. He said, someone said, well, having black contact lenses is not a big deal. People can buy those.
Right.
Well, in 1996, he states, and I agree with him, you can't. Okay, you would have to know. I mean, you would have to be connected with someone in Hollywood or somebody who's like really, it would be a very special thing to come up with black contact lenses.
That's how Dan Rather lost his career. With documents that were made on a Word document masquerading as something that somebody typed in 1970.
Yeah, about George Bush's just weren't true.
Yeah, it was the wrong font. They didn't have typewriters with Times New Roman in 1974.
Here's my counter argument to what he said, though. He says, there's no one in 1996 had black contact lenses. It would be very rare for someone to have it.
Maybe outside of Hollywood.
Outside of Hollywood. Now, well, let's say for 1 second that someone did have it.
Right.
If 13 or 14-year-old boys, let's just say maybe their dad had a connection to Hollywood or something, and if a 13, I'm just going to put myself in the situation. If I walked into my dad's, I don't know, man room or something, and I saw that he had black contact lenses, I would put them things on and I would run out somewhere and mess with someone.
Yeah.
So his argument that it would be very unlikely for it to happen is true, but it's also the argument that I would use that if it was possible, it would be very likely that it would happen.
Yeah.
So I would say that I think that Brian, if it happened, I don't believe that it was anything whatever, and if it, and I don't know if he made it up or not, but I will say his argument that I'm a journalist and it doesn't benefit me to come up with a story like this, because I didn't make any money for it. I don't buy that at all. You're a journalist, okay? You're into a cult. You write stories about the cult. It benefits you in a lot of ways that don't have to do with money. And don't tell me that that's going to ruin your career. Number one, you're not exactly, no one's heard of the guy any more than they've heard of me. Okay, so it's not like your career is on this like big pat. Mine isn't. Yours isn't either. So it's not going to hurt your career because your career isn't that big. I could come up with a story right now and tell you that I saw a UFO. I have, we have 600 followers. Yeah. It's not going to hurt me that I come up with a UFO. It may get me 1,000 followers, right? So I don't believe. But anyway, one thing I would say though is interesting about the Blackout Children thing is it has a lot in common with vampires.
Yeah.
Almost like children vampires.
Well, the question I have too is that the Black-Eyed Children story itself, most of these urban legends are pinned to a place and to an event. You know what I mean? So you got we had our legend of back in the day, a school bus, drove off a bridge. So if you go out there on the anniversary of the tragedy and you park your car at midnight and you put baby powder on your car, then at some point you'll hear these hands slapping the car and you'll see handprints in the car from all the ghosts of the children
which is similar to like the Crosswit light stories.
Exactly. And the Crosswit lights,
which I've been out there, dude. I have seen, and I'm telling you something, what I saw was not airport lights. I saw something that casted light. What I saw was either something real, some type of phenomenon, or a hoax.
Yeah.
It was not airport lights in distance. It was not headlights. Me and Scott Higginbotham, I'll call his name out because he can verify this. Me, Scott Higginbotham, Karen Higginbotham, and I think Drew Higginbotham when she was real small at the time. We all went out there, and me and Scott walked down the road. We witnessed this. We did film it. I don't know where the video is, but we did film it. But it was casting light around it. It was either some natural phenomenon that we can't explain,
right,
or it was somebody with a flare.
Yeah.
There's no, it was, and I'm not, people say, well, do you know for a fact it was, no, I don't know for a fact it was anything.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you right now, it was either real or it was a hoax. And I didn't hoax it, so I may have gotten hoaxed, but whatever it was physically there.
Well, look, weird stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
In defense of the guy that told the story about the Black-Eyed Children, my buddy Tom and I were driving back from Baton Rouge to here, because I went down to help him hang a show or take one. He's an artist.
Yeah.
And so he frequently shows at a gallery in Baton Rouge. And since he went to LSU and I went to LSU, not at the same time, anytime he goes down, he's like, hey, you want to make a run to LSU? And so it's nice to go, visit the old stopping grounds. And we were on our way back one night. It was after midnight, and we were in between. The longest part of that drive from Baton Rouge to Monticello is after you cross the Arkansas line.
Right.
And then it's like, just be done already. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you're driving up north on 425, just waiting for it to become. And I don't remember exactly where we were, but all of a sudden I look in front of us, and in the headlights in the distance, and I say to Tom, "Are you freaking kidding me?" And there is a blue balloon floating above the highway at about 6 feet in the air.
Yeah.
Just still, with a string attached to it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? And we drive past the thing. We're like, well, that was creepy. You know what I mean? Now, what's the explanation for it? obviously it's a helium balloon that was, got loose, and now its helium is finally
It's
dying.
kind of dying.
But we caught it just at that moment where it's not hitting the ground. It was just sitting there.
Did I tell you the story?
So I'm gonna have to use that because it just was so creepy looking for a moment. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Where no other cars are around. It's after midnight. We're tired, getting punch drunk for being on the road too long, and then there's just this creepy Kubrick, the shining blue balloon.
Well, did I tell you? I think Matt, maybe you can remind me. I don't know if I told the story. I know I told it recently. I don't know if I told it here or somewhere else. Did I tell you the story about us seeing the two floating lights coming over 425? Did I tell you that story? Oh man, well this is a perfect example. Okay, so one night, this was like a couple years ago, and I was working for the city, and I was on patrol, and I was on 425 South, and this was probably, it was either, I think it was July-ish. So it was like, I know it's July-ish. It's kind of part of the story. But anyway, So it was like, I won't tell you the exact date, but so I was coming down the road, and I was just almost to the overpass on 425 South. So before the college,
Okay.
right out of town,
Here in town.
right here. So anyway, I see these lights, like coming toward, just look. I was in the Marine Corps. Okay, I was in the Hilo Assault Company. I've done a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of things. I'm very familiar with military aircraft. I'm very familiar with all types of military aircraft.
Right.
Those that you're supposed to know about, those you're not supposed to know about, that type of stuff. So anyway, and I saw this coming, and so I got out of my vehicle, and I obviously listened for sound because I was like, "Isn't the helicopter's really, really low?"
Yeah.
Nothing, no sound, none whatsoever.
Wow.
And I mean, these lights are like it's there. I can see the orb off the lights.
Mm-hmm.
And I got on a
How
radio.
high above the?
Oh man, well at nighttime, here's the thing. You really can't tell.
Right.
People think you can. This is why UFOs stories get criticized, because when you're looking up in the night sky, you're looking in black, and people say, "Well, this is right. It's really low." You
Right.
don't know that.
Right.
But it gives you the feeling that it's real low,
Right.
right? Well, this absolutely. I could have been wrong, no doubt, and I'll never claim that something I thought I saw was, But if you would have asked me to swear under oath if I thought it was close, I would tell you that I thought it was under 100 feet.
Right.
I mean, very, very close.
Right.
And it's moving pretty fast. It's very steady, and they're coming right over the overpass. So I think I can't remember how close Chris Austin was to me, which is the other officer, but he ended up right there with, I don't know if I called him on the radio or whatever, but anyway, he come right there. So we're both standing out of our vehicle, and I've got my phone out, I'm filming this thing.
Right.
And I actually say, "What the fuck is that?" And Chris goes, "Dude, I figured you would know." So we're both seeing this.
Right.
And then it comes, and I mean, it's like it just shoots over the overpass, real low, absolutely no sound to it whatsoever. Very two bright lights. They're right beside each other. That was UFO, right? Except for, we sat there and we started talking, and I mean, we watched it go away. We watched it go north. I mean, just we call people, other people were seeing it, and we're sitting there like, "What the f is that?"
Right.
And then finally, it just kind of like went away. And then we're sitting there looking south, and then we see it happen again. We see something but only this time it's one. We see it rise up from the ground, and it starts coming toward us. And Austin says, "Is that coming from the tent?" Okay, so the fireworks tent, right?
Right.
425 South, Days Fireworks. Chinese lanterns. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The ones that you just light and they float. So we drove over there, and they're 4th of July's over with. They're done selling fireworks,
Right.
and they're lighting these things, and they're
that's
floating
hilarious.
up. And if they light them at the same time, the wind catches them the same way, and they travel together, right? And that's what we were seeing. But I'm going to tell you right now, and we weren't the only one. One of the other officers didn't know that we had figured out what it was, and he saw it too in town.
Yeah.
And he was like, the funniest thing about this story is he didn't know what it was until like the other day.
Oh.
He's telling us this story, and I'm laughing, and I'm going, I said, "When was that, Ted?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Dude, it was like," I said, was it July or December?" And he goes, I think it was July. It was July. I said, "Well, it was either July or December."
Right.
And I told him, I said, "Dude, this is what it was." And when I told it to him, he was like, "Oh, that is what it was.
Yeah.
And I said, well, so that's how things, a person can be telling the absolute truth.
Oh, absolutely.
And now you think about this. If I had told that story, if I had experienced the exact same thing, but the connection to the fireworks tent had never been introduced.
Right. Or established.
Whatsoever. If I had, let's say I messed up the time frame and I told people this happened in September.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Then there would never be an explanation for it.
Right.
Ever.
And I think that happens all the time. And as our recent Supreme Court nomination process nicely illustrated to us, people's memories are one of the, this as a police officer.
Oh, absolutely. Well,
Eyewitness accounts are about the least reliable. And they've done psychological experiments where, like, in one of them, this is one of my favorite ones.
You're absolutely right.
Go on YouTube
Horrible.
and find this. And what they do is they set you up and they say, watch these people. There'll be 4 people standing in a group.
Yeah.
And they're passing around 3 red balls and 1 blue ball.
Yeah.
And they're just doing like this, right? They're just going back and forth, and each person is grabbing a ball as he passes it to somebody else passes the other person. Mm-hmm. And then you watch that video for 30 seconds. And after the video's over and it fades to black, a question comes up on the screen. Did you see the gorilla? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
And so you go back and watch the video again, and in the middle of that, because you're paying attention to the balls, a guy in a gorilla suit walks right in between the group.
Yeah, I've seen it.
And you honestly, right? Didn't you have the same experience I did? You did not see that.
Well, and I'll tell you this: in the Marine Corps, this is funny because in the Marine Corps, actual memory is never. It's never good.
A lot of fun. Yeah.
That's why we used to teach guys to make sketches, and and now take pictures. And if you're doing reconnaissance, your word, exactly. Your word is not. It's never considered. And we ran exercises to where it was broken down to me in training one time that being tasked out on something, you may not be told exactly what you're looking for because they don't want to bias your opinion.
Right.
So whenever we would train guys and we would say things like appears to be like a cylinder, it appears to be a long cylinder on the back of a truck. We don't want to tell guys we're looking for a missile,
right.
A launch pad or whatever, because they may see it when in actuality what they really saw was just a giant pipe on the back of a truck.
Right.
But if you look at it, I think it was, what's the physicist, Neil Tyson DeGrassi. Anyway, he said something really cool one time, and he says stuff that I agree with. He says stuff that I don't agree with. But one thing that I liked what he said was, in science, your witness testimony doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
But in the court of law, someone can go to prison or be executed for it.
Yeah.
It's weird how our scientific method does not trust. The military doesn't trust witness testimony. No one trusts witness testimony except for a criminal system. Right. And then you can wind up in prison for the rest of your life because someone said they saw you. But so it's real interesting to me because if someone asked me right now, do you trust witness testimony? I start to trust a little more when it's collective.
Right.
But I also collective bias.
But as we've also, witness testimony by itself is not enough to convict. You have to have corroborating evidence for that witness testimony, and it can't be hearsay.
Right.
And
that's true.
Do you see what I'm saying? So the law at least has built into it some safeguards against somebody just being able to say, I saw that guy do it, and then that's simply never going to be enough, and it shouldn't be enough.
But I think what he's saying is in science, witness testimony, it doesn't even corroborate in. It's like, it doesn't matter what you saw. No. Can you repeat it? Can you,
and that's sure, what is it DeGrassi? Is that the name of the show?
Is that what I'm saying right?
Yeah.
Okay.
What he would.
Luckily,
we
don't have enough people to matter. No one's going to listen to us and go, "These guys are idiots."
There's a fundamental problem too, and physics kind of points it out. Is that do we change the thing that we're looking at by looking at it? And that's the kind of confirmation bias that you're talking about. That's why it is. Sherlock Holmes was a very interesting literary character because. What did he say one time? He said something like, and I'm not a big Sherlock Holmes guy, but he doesn't go in and look for what he looks for what's missing, not for what's there.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
I know what you mean. I don't know what he said, but I know what you're saying.
So it's a different way of approaching the problems. Yeah, and drawing deductions. We were talking about this in my philosophy class the other day because we're doing Aquinas and we've done Aristotle, and the difference between deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning is that deductive reasoning is demonstrable, right? You can see it. So mathematical reasoning, you can see it. It's right before your eyes, and you don't need corroborating evidence. On the other hand, deductive reasoning, for that reason, does not directly, maybe, relate to reality.
Yeah.
So the reasoning of science is inductive, where at the end of the day, you actually have to make a leap of faith to believe that the conclusion you draw, you never know in science whether you're absolutely certain.
Yeah.
What you know is that it's more likely than not that this is the case.
Well, let me ask you this, and then we're going to get into a supernatural, mystical type of discussion here, and I'm interested in your opinion on this. Okay, because we have things like black-eyed children, we have things like Slender Man, who I believe we know we can pretty much trace down when they were created. I don't accept that black-eyed children were reported from the 50s until I see stories of them from the 50s. Now, I did read where they said it's based on some Irish folklore, and I have an Irish folklore book, and I looked through there, and I couldn't find the references they were talking about. Not saying they don't exist, but I just couldn't find them. And I Googled it, and I couldn't find it. I found a ton of stories, some we can talk about, but I just didn't find anything. But I was listening to someone, and this is kind of going into like super, creepy stuff, and he said that, he was talking about, is there ability, do you think that there is a possible ability for the collective thoughts to actually create something that didn't exist before in the demonic?
Actually, yes.
So as a Catholics, first let me establish this. As Catholics, we both believe in, and I'll let you explain what we both believe better, because I can't articulate this very well, but we both believe in spiritual warfare. We both believe in God, angels, demons, a war. So is there a possible, because what he was suggesting was that even, there may not have been a such thing as a black-eyed children yesterday, there may not be a such thing as a Slender Man yesterday, but once this is introduced to the collective thought, is it possible that this, the demonic aspect or the spiritual aspect adopts this and forms it and uses it against mankind?
I would say yes, and let me go back to Eyes Wide Shut to give the answer that I had, because I've been thinking about this.
This is going to be good. I'm ready to hear it.
Since we've been talking about it. So Eyes Wide Shut posits a world where there are inner and outer rings, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the magic circle. And at the very beginning of the magic circle, you've got a bunch of unwitting dupes, right? Who perform functions. And this is the way any Gnostic cult actually operates.
Right.
So I would include in that
sweet, thank you.
I would include in that Scientology, for instance, right? And they always adopt the same stance about the inner workings of the cult. And that is, unless you are graduated, right, to the right degree, and they'll always use those terms, right, the degree, or there'll be ranks, right? So people in the lowest rung are not allowed to know the super secret stuff, right?
Yeah.
But if they perform services appropriately, then they can be, like in the military, they'll be initiated into the next higher ring.
And keep that thought too, because and I think it's important, is that and this isn't directly related, but just show you how culture does use these techniques in the military, in other things. You have you have levels at which you're able to access certain things. So I'll just give an example into the tactical community or the military. There's only certain jobs in the military and combat arms that are going to require security clearance.
Right.
So if you're infantry, you're not going to need a security clearance. But if you work with radios, you are. But let's just say you're moving up levels. So let's say in the Marine Corps, you go from being an infantryman who doesn't require a security clearance, and then you're going to become a scout sniper or a reconnaissance marine who does require a secret security clearance.
Right.
Well, that requires a degree, it requires a level, and I guess you could say an indoctrination, a selection process to get into that. And in order for you to get to that level, you're going to prove yourself under certain. I'm not going to go into all the tasks and stuff like that, but you got to prove yourself. And then let's say if you went to a force reconnaissance, or you went to a higher level that may require a top secret clearance. In other words, these levels of knowledge, though, I'm not saying that at that being a reconnaissance marine, you know anything about what we're talking about. I'm just giving an example of showing that these parallels in the military and what you're talking about, the secret societies, as far as the methods of which you get there, are very similar.
Basically the same. And so in the world that our main character in Eyes Wide Shut is in, one of the crises that he has to face is that he's somehow stumbled into a level of knowledge that he hasn't been initiated into yet. That's why he's in danger. Right? And he gets warned off of that. But I was thinking about it after we talked about it a lot. I said, all right, do you really believe that the people at the upper echelons of these Gnostic cults actually believe when they sacrifice somebody to Baphomet
Yeah.
that there's a real Baphomet god or devil that they're sacrificing it to? Like, is their belief literal or not? Right?
So
Now, I'm asking the question openly, but
Yeah.
I also kind of have an answer for it.
I look at it, I'm kind of both on that. I think that my initial instincts is that I guess you could say the normal higher level people probably do not believe in it. That maybe that they use it as a method, that's how you get other people to believe and get on board with stuff.
Right.
However, I think that ultimately, that because it is a truth, or because, when I say it's truth, but because the occult aspect of here's what I'm getting at. What's the point of being rich? The point of being rich is ultimately power, is it not?
Right.
I mean,
Well, for some, yeah.
well, I think let's say you got all the money in the world,
Right.
and you still want something else. What else is there to want?
Right.
More power, right? Because obviously money isn't getting it for you, so there's
Right.
more power. And if let's say you have all the power in the world, or let's say all the perceived power, let's say you're maybe not all the power in the world, but let's say you're in what would be considered by normal people a very powerful position, like the president, or like whatever. Then, if you're looking for something, there's got to be. I think this is why the Hollywood elites and maybe other people are drawn to the occult,
Yeah.
because when they get money and they get what they perceive as power, there's something else that they do believe in or they want to believe in. So I think there are those who do believe
And
this.
the flip side of it is it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because even if it's fake, they're still getting the things that they sacrificed themselves to get. It's for money and for power and to access.
True that.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what I'd written down after we talked that one time. I said, the ancient Celtic rites and the secret societies, sacrifices are necessary to maintain power.
Yeah.
And degeneracy itself is to ensure enslavement. And it happens incrementally. So it happens when you're at the lower end. You're asked to compromise. You got to compromise something of yourself on your way up to the next level or into the inner sanctum, until you're admitted to that guy on the throne who seems to be the leader of it all, who's telling you that all of this is a sacrifice to a demon, but the demon's reward for your sacrifices will be power, will be access to women, will be unlimited. Enjoyment of your sexual appetite, in any way that you possibly can, and those things are actually provided by the cult. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's real, because it's real.
Yeah.
So then you ask the Catholic, well, how do you think that operates? I mean, is it demon or not? And
Yeah. So my point.
say,
well, just let me reintroduce the question. The question was that can you create an entity that didn't, or can you make a legend true? Can you create something on the internet, say like Slender Man? A few years back, there was two girls that stabbed their friend.
Yeah, I think they just got sentenced, right?
Did they? I don't know. 17 or 19 times.
Yeah.
The girl survived, but the reason why they did this is because so they could go live in the center of the woods with Slender Man. I think later on they said that they were afraid for their families' lives or something. But initially, it was something to the effect of that they, it was because of this fake or this entity that was created on the internet.
Just getting rid of the evidence of my beer bottle clock back here.
You can track the urban legend down. Let's think about the internet these days. Most times you can track this down. We know who started it. We know where it come from. We know what the first post it was on.
Right.
But these two girls believed in it so much. For some reason, they believed in it so much that they stabbed their friend like 17 or 19 times in order to serve it in some way. So is it possible that you can actually believe in something so much that you can make it, in a sense, real, or that the demonic can imitate it? Or
I don't think that's it. I think it's this way, and that brings us to another question we have to answer. What is evil? Right?
What is evil?
What is it? And I've had this conversation with a lot of Catholics before, where they'll say that what you have to understand about evil is that it's not okay. So Aristotle says that when matter and form meet, they become substance. Okay. So we're a little bit off in our understanding of evil when we think of evil as a substance. It's not matter and form. Okay. It's not. That is to say, evil is not a thing.
Okay.
Okay. And that makes sense because we believe, okay, if God is all good, then everything he creates is good. So everything in the universe is good. It's a good, right?
Right.
So what Catholics believe is that evil comes into being when somebody who has free will and unfettered intelligence makes the choice to choose a lesser good in the face of a greater good.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So you got to know the difference, that this is the thing that you ought to do, but you'd rather do this and you choose this. It's your action that's evil. It's not a thing. It's not a substance. Are you following me?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to our how do Gnostic cults, secret knowledge, secret societies work. They work by enticing people to compromise their choices among goods.
Their actions.
And it's their actions, right? So they entice them. And here's the thing that okay, there are two different versions of the devil that we have, and one is kind of really remote from us now. You've got kind of Milton's version of Lucifer as the most beautiful fallen angel, right? Eloquent, poetic, beautiful.
And is that where that came from?
That's in Paradise Lost, right? And
right.
It makes total sense, because when you read Paradise Lost, you actually sympathize with the devil in that poem. That's how brilliant that poem is. You get where the devil's coming from. You're like you almost read it and you're like, I can't blame you for being upset with God.
Is that fair?
It's not fair. Well, that's what he's mad. He's like Ahab and Moby Dick. He's angry at God that the setup is not fair. And so his response to that is to rebel, and there's something admirable in that rebellion. So that's one version.
Especially in America, where we're built on rebellion.
Right, exactly. So there's something admirable. That's a Western figure. We've had this figure since Prometheus. Prometheus is the rebelling god who steals fire from the heaven to give to mankind. So it's been around for a long time. But the other version of the actual Lucifer is Dante's, and that's in the Divine Comedy and in the Inferno. When we finally see Lucifer in his condition in hell, he's chest deep in ice with wings, with giant bat wings. He's got 3 heads, and in the mouths of each of the head are the biggest traitors to benefactors, according to Dante, that have ever lived.
Explain that.
Being a betrayer of a benefactor is the worst sin that you can commit.
Why? What is it?
It's turning on the person that gave you everything that you have.
Right.
Okay? The source of everything you have. So who's the biggest traitor to a benefactor? That would be Lucifer.
Right.
Who betrays God.
Right.
That would be, what's his name who betrayed Christ?
Judas.
So Judas is in one of the and then Dante puts Brutus and Cassius in the other 2 mouths as the betrayer of Caesar, for political reasons, but they were the ones that killed Julius Caesar, and they plotted to get rid of the Caesar, and Caesar had made them who they were, so they are the other 2 historical betrayers of benefactors.
And listen, continue talking. I'll be right back.
At any rate, so that version of the fallen angel is the one that I actually prefer, because he's chest deep in ice, he's trapped, he cannot himself roam in the world seeking the ruination of souls. But he can influence, right? His will. It's almost like Tolkien's version. You see it in Sauron, right? Sauron, in The Lord of the Rings, in a sense, because he has no body, he can't do anything that he can't seduce some other creature to do. Does that make sense? He has to seduce and twist and pervert other people to do his will for them, because he can't literally do it himself. And that's kind of the way the devil is too. He can't do anything himself that... How did I put it? I don't know if I put it on a podcast or not. The devil can't do anything himself that without the help of one of God's creatures, and God won't do anything himself that a creature can do. So it's the flip side of the same coin. God delegates all of the good things to his creatures to allow them to enjoy them, and the devil can't do anything that God can do, or anything for himself, so he's got to convince somebody to do it for him. So that brings us back to the vampire version of evil, because the vampire has to seduce the individual into doing the evil themselves. Hannibal Lecter is that guy. His pleasure is in getting you to participate in your own ruin.
Right. That's
his biggest pleasure, because he's exploiting the exercise of your intelligence and the exercise of your free will. He's not. That's why among the scariest of monsters, I always put the vampire at the top, because what he does is he seduces you into turning yourself into a monster. And doing it by saying yes.
Right.
I cannot remember the name of this movie. There's a movie with Willem Dafoe in it, where and it was made by the guy who did Twin Peaks. What was that guy's name? Anyway,
What was the movie about?
It had Nick Cage in it, and I can't even remember, Laura Dern, William Dafoe, and it had fire in and it came out and people did not like it. They didn't understand it. I'm not knocking them for it because I had a hard time following what it was this film was trying to do too. I'll have to go back and look at it again. But in it, William Dafoe's character appears in this woman's hotel room as if he's going to rape her, right? But he does it in such a way that he turns her to the point where she...
Dog Eat Dog?
No. It's
Nicolas Cage?
it's a David Lynch movie. So let's look up David Lynch and...
Okay, because I looked up Nicolas Cage, William Dafoe, and it's come up Dog Eat Dog.
Let me look. Wild at Heart.
Oh, okay.
It's called Wild at Heart with Laura Dern, and I think Nick Cage was in it, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Yeah, Nick Cage, Laura Dern, William Dafoe, J.E. Freeman. But anyway, it's a bizarre film. But again, in it has that sort of vampire moment because he turns her so that she desires what it is. She desires to have sex with him, right?
The seduction.
And as soon as she shows him that she wants to, then he walks out of the room.
So he really only wanted to...
He only wanted to humiliate her. Do you see what I mean? So it's worse. It's almost worse. And I remember seeing that thinking, man, that was really evil. You know what I mean? The whole thing, what he just did. Because again, he has to turn her will to seduce her. And in fact, this is one of the reasons Jodie Foster didn't end up playing Clarice Starling in any of the other Hannibal Lecter movies.
Why?
Because in the books, she joins him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she becomes a cannibal with him. She falls in love with Hannibal.
Are you serious?
Yeah, that whole thing. That's what's missing from that. What you don't realize
Did
is
you
going
know that,
on.
Matt?
In the books, in the Thomas Harris books, Clarice falls in love with and runs off to Florence, Italy with Hannibal Lecter. She falls in love with him, which is what he was doing the whole time. And you notice in that film, there are these little lines. They'll say that we're in love, Clarice.
Yeah, I remember
They'll
that.
say, and he asks her these really personal questions and stuff. So there's a seduction going on, and what you get in that film is and I even talked about this in my film class, but what you get in that film are mirror images of seduction. Hannibal Lecter seducing Clarice Starling is the polar opposite of what Buffalo Bill is doing. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
Buffalo Bill is like and at the end of the film, he says to her, don't worry, you don't have to worry about my coming after you. The world is a better place with you in it, right?
Right.
And one of her friends says, are you worried about Hannibal Lecter? She said, no, he would never do that. He would find it to be in poor taste, right? And she's right. She's absolutely right. She has nothing whatever to worry about from Hannibal Lecter because he's too refined for the kind of behavior that a Buffalo Bill would participate in. Do you see what I mean? He would never. And in the subsequent movies, you see that whole theme of getting other people to do things is what he glories in. It's not necessarily him putting his hands on anybody, although he is obviously capable of doing it.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. All right, so we're talking about the devil's seduction. We're talking about the greatest part of the evil is seducing you to want him. So how does that play into, we got the Exorcist over here, and we're talking about demon possession.
And I've been puzzled by that for a long time because demonic possession doesn't make sense to me. Like
that was my next question. That is an uncontrolled. It? Okay, maybe in the beginning, maybe it's the fact that I don't know how people become possessed. I don't know if you have to invite. I don't know whatever if it's a vampirical type of thing to where maybe that's where the analogy comes from. It has to.
No, that's definitely where the analogy comes from.
Okay.
Absolutely.
But it takes over. Possession, isn't that the point of possession? It takes over?
Is,
or is that just a myth? What's the reality of possession?
Well,
let's just talk about that. What do you think the reality of possession is?
That's what I really did want to talk about because it also dovetails into some of the stuff that you've said about urban legends because, The Exorcist was written by William Peter Blatty in 1969. It got made into a movie in 71. Blatty was heavily involved in the making of the movie. It's directed by William Friedkin, who had already gotten an Oscar for The French Connection. So we're talking about heavyweights. The movie rights in 1969 or 70 that they paid to Blatty for The Exorcist was $641,000 for the movie rights.
Right.
That's a huge amount. Like I was talking to my buddy who his first novel is being made into a movie, and he was paid $50,000 for the rights to that movie.
Right.
And so when I saw that number, I was like, wow, Blatty. He became like instantly rich as a result of this book that he did. But it was based on a true story, right? but a lot of the elements of the true story are exactly like urban legend. You know what I mean? And so people are split down the middle whether the actual case ever really happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it supposedly was based upon the exorcism of a boy who is alternatively known by the name of, I wrote it down.
I'll look it up.
No, I got it right here.
Okay.
He's always been referred to as Roland Doe because the family did not want his identity ever to be known. You know what I mean? And sometimes he's also referred to as Robbie Mannheim, but those are not his real name.
Exorcism of Roland Doe.
Yeah, and all of it started in 1949. And apparently he was an only child. He spent most of his social time with adults, especially one aunt who introduced him to the paranormal.
So was she like a fortune teller?
Yeah, she was in parapsychology. I mean, not psychology, but into the paranormal. And so he showed interest in the Ouija board. She let him. So that's where the Ouija board element in The Exorcist comes in. He apparently was taken to Georgetown University Hospital, where the first exorcism was attempted. And they said that he managed to get loose from one of the restraints. And let me back up a little bit. The reason the family got worried, they were Lutheran, okay? And they got worried because they started hearing scratching in the walls. His bed would move. Furniture would move around on its own. Things would fly around the room. Later on... His
real name, by the way, is Robbie Mannheim.
No, that's right. But I think that's also a pseudonym.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it says here alias Roland Doe.
Yeah.
But it's so I don't know if that's a pseudonym or not. But anyway, it's got a picture of him.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's his real name. I didn't get to look up. I just stumbled down this rabbit hole recently. So I started making notes. But what I noticed is that even in the newspaper accounts, the contemporaneous ones, like in 1949, the Washington Post actually ran an article about a man a priest that exorcised this boy. And they said that he was from Mount Rainier, Maryland, when really it turned out he was from a different town called Cottage City, Maryland, which was maybe 20 minutes away. And so these guys have done a movie, and I'll recommend it to. I haven't seen it yet, but I watched the trailer this afternoon, and I read about it. The Brooks brothers made a movie that was inspired by The Exorcist, which is a documentary to try to get to the kind of stuff, Casey, you were talking about. Like, what I want to know is, can I pin this to any actual facts?
Right.
Right? So
tell me where,
So the outlines of the story are he traveled with family after he was exorcised at Georgetown University. He managed to get out of one of his straps. He managed to pry a bed spring out of the mattress and cut the priest that did the exorcism there. So he injured him. When he got to St. Louis, he was examined by some priests at St. Louis University, which is a Catholic university, and Jesuit, I think, just like Georgetown is Jesuit. The Archbishop there gave permission because there were more and more things happening. You know how in the movie The Exorcist she has like words appear on her skin?
Yeah.
They reported that with this kid too. And so two priests did exorcisms, and apparently they worked. And he grew up and had a fairly normal life. Now, people who've done hard research on this case have said the kid was an obnoxious, spoiled kid. People reported that he loved playing tricks and that this was probably all fake. He's just no evidence or nothing.
So in the original story, he didn't do anything that physically proved that it was.
They just, you know how skeptics are. Like, you can flying objects in a room. If you're a smart enough kid, you could figure out. Like you were saying with the black contacts. If you're a smart enough kid, you could figure out how to fool your own family members into thinking that things were flying around the room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you set it up right, you could probably do it. We do movie special effects all the time.
Let me give a disclaimer real quick, and let me know if you disagree with me on this. Just so people understand, though, as a process, the Catholic Church has a system for this.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church does not just accept random stuff that could just be trickery or
I guess
you could say fuckery or whatever you want. There's a system to verifying that this is
exactly. And the Exorcist movie is accurate when it comes to what is required to be shown. The person has to possess knowledge that they cannot possibly have. The person has to speak in languages that they have no training in or exposure to, and that has to be verified.
Yeah.
Those two things are like if you don't have those two things, then the church will say we don't know what this is, but it's not demonic possession.
And let me interrupt again too. If you want a really clear example of that, not competing with Exorcism movie, but if you want a modern day movie that's really very clear about those aspects, with actually Anthony Hopkins from Silence of the Lambs, we're talking about him, is the movie The Rite.
And that's one of the movies that inspired my novel, The Incorruptibles.
Oh, okay, great.
I saw it and I was like, this is the kind of book that I would like to see more of, because that film takes exorcism and demonic possession very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And I think it shows an actual more true version of what it looks like, as opposed to Blatty's The Exorcist. And that's not to take anything away from Blatty, but the possession in The Exorcist is so sensational. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because what he did is he gave every symptom that you can possibly have. He gave it to one
person,
to one case.
Well, there's
that's very rarely when you read about these things, you read about the women who will, in the throes of being possessed, will throw up nails.
There's a scene
that nobody can figure out where she got and when she ate. You know what I mean? Like
in The Rite, there's a scene talking about that. Just
is that from The Rite?
Yeah, well, yeah, that does happen in The Rite. But the first scene though is funny because you bring that up. Is the first exorcism scene in The Rite. The skeptical priest, he's actually not even a priest yet, he's taking his vows, he's in seminary. Right. Because he was skeptical, he was sent to Anthony Hopkins. And Anthony Hopkins is a Jesuit priest who is kind of like a rogue priest. He goes out and does a real he's like, in the Marine Corps we would say he's a dude that's in the trenches. Right. He's not a keyboard warrior, he's not, I mean, he's like a real, and it's almost like the Catholic Church is like, we endorse him but we leave him alone because he's out there doing real work.
Right.
So that's kind of the setup. The skeptical young aspiring priest, or actually he's not even aspiring, he doesn't even want to be a priest, he wants to just go away and not be, but one of the conditions is they're trying to convince him it's real. They send Anthony Hopkins. He shows up, Anthony Hopkins says, okay, I'm going to take you and show you something. So the first exorcism he takes him to, it's very anticlimactic.
Yeah.
He goes in there, Anthony Hopkins asks the girl some questions. The girl eventually does start, and he does all this. He tests the language, he tests the knowledge of what can't be, and then she acts crazy for a minute. He says a prayer, and then she kind of collapses, and within a few minutes is over with almost nothing really happening.
Right.
And then he turns her loose, and he's okay, we're done for the day. And the young, I don't know what to call him, I guess the young seminarian says, "Is that it?" And Anthony Hopkins actually makes the comment, making fun of the exorcist. He said, "Well, what did you expect? Heads turning in pea soup?"
Yeah. Yeah.
So it actually brings that perspective, saying, listen, this is it's like the director's trying to say, this is a more closely documented version of what really happens.
Right. So, and that's to take nothing away from the filmmakers, because what you do in film, of course, is you exaggerate things, and you sensationalize them. And like I said, The Exorcist, I picked it up a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago, for the first time in a long time, and I watched it by myself at home, thinking, okay, we are so used to the horror genre that this is just going to seem dated and hokey and corny. And man, this movie stands up. My son is watching it. He's in my film class right now, and he's of the generation that's watched all the Conjuring films and Hereditary and all of them.
I have too, and they're just.
And I said, Liam, aren't you impressed with how low tech you could do some really spectacular things back in the 1970s? I mean, this is from 1973.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's incredible. You know what I mean? How simple they're able to do what they do.
And more spooky.
Yeah.
As a result.
As a result. And so it really, really works. And I warned my students in my class, I said, look, this is a disturbing film. Get ready. Get ready. It's disturbing. I'll understand if people get to the point where they can't watch it. None of them. Not one kid in my class has seen the original.
Isn't that weird that like we're this is one of the, I mean, it actually says it on the thing, the scariest movie of all time.
It is.
And we're in a generation no one's even seen it.
Yeah, and they've never seen it.
How do they react?
They are mesmerized. You know what I mean? They're like, we have to watch it in thirds, so they're going to actually finish it on Tuesday morning, right before Halloween. I was like, I timed it so that they get the end of the film at Halloween. Nice. But what's interesting is that when researchers went back to the original case of this Roland Doe or this Robbie Mannheim,
whatever his name is,
they started finding discrepancies. And what's funny is, like, the original Washington Post story about the priest that did the exorcism, the whole tone of the story is tongue in cheek. You know what I mean? That this family was suffering from a poltergeist-like ghost, and they thought that the son was possessed, and so on and so forth. So these Brooks Brothers guys have gone back and they said, okay, I'm not going to take the approach and make an opinion about whether he was possessed by demons or not.
right?
I want to find out what facts I actually can verify. And one of the things that Blatty mentioned was that he spoke to one of the priests that did perform the exorcism when he was writing the book. He did his research.
The actual exorcism?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the 2 or 3 actual exorcisms that took place. Because there was one at Georgetown, and then there were at least, I think, 2 more down at St. Louis University.
But the movie portrays it as just one, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And sort of out of deference to this priest, he changed the main character of his book from a little boy, a 14-year-old boy, to a 12-year-old girl.
Why was that?
Just because the priest was very hesitant about sensationalizing this real. I mean, this is a real person.
So it was just he was protecting it by trying to.
Yeah, he wanted to protect the kid and said,
But in essence, that made it more creepy because if there's one thing that a father.
Yeah.
And I don't have any daughters. You do. Mm-hmm. If there's one thing that I would imagine a father is more protective of than a son.
Oh,
yeah. A daughter.
Yeah. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons why Blatty had to decide to write the story from the point of where the situation was that the father was absent from the home.
Right. Because the father would have gotten involved, or
I don't know. I don't know. As a writer, I don't know how I would handle that. How would the father himself respond to it? But I also think that he did that on purpose too, because the dialogue in both the book and the film, which tracks very closely to the book, because Blatty wrote the script. You notice that the character of Chris MacNeil, from the very beginning, really quite casually takes the Lord's name in vain, specifically saying "God damn it" and "Jesus Christ," all the way through the film. Like it's just. And she's not a believer. Somebody asked her, "Are you a religious person? Do you have a religion?" No. Is your daughter? No, she's not either. And then when they're trying to suggest to her, and basically what they say about it, and this will go back to some of the questions you were asking, is we're not saying that she's really possessed by the devil. What we're saying is that if she believes that she's possessed by the devil, then an exorcism can be an efficacious way to get her to stop believing that she's possessed by the devil.
Yeah, I believe that she's now free from the devil.
So the scientists split the baby and they say we don't really believe it. What's interesting about that now, okay, is that now the American Psychological Association no longer takes the position that demonic possession is not real.
What?
They've changed their mind. Too many psychologists have seen cases where they say there's no other explanation for. So, because they used to diagnose people as if people thought
if there was, I mean, just interrupt. If there was another explanation, then the Catholic Church wouldn't be able to perform exorcism.
Well,
if it was done correctly, right?
Right.
I mean, if it was done by what we say we do.
Well, you would say it should be illegal in one sense but think about this: in the law, you cannot use a defense. If you use the defense in court that the devil made me do it, that's unacceptable, right? Yeah. Right? You're not allowed to say it. It's in law.
You're allowed
it's
to say whatever you want, but
you can say it, but it won't be accepted as an excuse for your behavior.
You can't have the devil as the alibi. You can't have someone who can't be in court to testify.
Right. Exactly. But by the same token, if you go into court and say that God told you to do it, you will be found to be insane.
Okay. So
Sally Yates Sally Yates drowns 5 of her children in the bathtub, and they find her insane because she said God told her to do it.
But they don't find you insane if you say the devil made me do it.
Right? They just isn't that interesting?
That is interesting. So God is allowed to.
God, if you believe in God in the legal system, and use him as an excuse for what you do, then you're insane. But we don't believe in the devil.
The devil is okay. So the devil is Santa Claus, but God is insanity.
I guess.
I mean, you see what I'm saying? I mean, I've often said, if atheists had such a problem with. Why did atheists not have a problem with Santa Claus? They don't get violent over Santa Claus.
Yeah.
But they get violent over, and not all atheists. I'm sorry. Yeah. I know that. I'm going to define atheism the same way that Neil Tyson deGrasse said he's not an atheist. And that is, he doesn't believe in God, but he doesn't identify himself with the people that are violently opposed to God and his ideals. Not to get off on that, but I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I like what he said one time when Neil Tyson deGrasse said that he still uses AD and BC despite his colleagues.
Right.
and he explained that, if you understand the history of that,
Right.
and he goes into the monks that created the calendar, and he said this was a great accomplishment.
Yeah.
And I'll be damned if I'm going to sit there and start using some other term and disavow them of their great accomplishments.
Yeah,
the
because
greatest calendar ever, just because it's not politically correct. Screw them.
And the other thing is that the system, the calendar system is Catholic, and it does.
That's what he said.
It dates to an historical event.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody claims that Jesus Christ didn't exist.
Yeah,
we know he did.
They just despite.
They just argue about what he
dispute.
was or who he was, right?
Yeah.
So I like his take on that because I'm the same way.
Yeah,
In my discipline, we get all these BCE, before the Common Era,
and he refuses to use that. He said,
if somebody uses that, if somebody uses the what's the after the Common Era? It's just CE,
Yeah.
right?